preview time. We got Texas Longhorns taking on Arizona State, and obviously the big storyline here is the spectacular season that Arizona State has had. And when you previewed the Big 12, many people, probably including myself, even ranked Arizona dead last. I mean, you have Kenny Dillingham, who's youngest coach in all of FBS football, second year at Arizona State, and he just has done a spectacular job at Arizona State, really turning this team around, and considering all of the nonsense that Herm Edwards and Antonio Pierce put this program through, for it to be going through that quickly is nothing short of impressive. And this Arizona State second Peach Bowl appearance, or last time was in 1970, whereas for Texas, their last Peach Bowl appearance was back when Colt McCoy was starting back in 2007. And when you look at this Arizona State team, they've won the past 6 games. They've knocked off a number of Big 12 opponents, such as Kansas State, Iowa State, and TCU. You sit there and remind yourself they won 45-19 in the Big 12 championship game, but quite frankly, a dominant performance by Cam Skattebo, and Sam Levitt does just enough to ride the ship there. You have to love the confidence that Levitt and Skattebo both have going into this game, saying, hey, we're gonna walk the walk, we're gonna talk the talk, and we're not afraid of this Texas football team. And the thing that's interesting about Texas too is both their losses are obviously versus Georgia, but it's weird to kind of put a finger on them in the sense of there's not as many obvious things about them that you identify and say, hey, that's what their skill set is, that's what their strengths are. It's a lot of, you just never really know what you're going to get with them to some extent. Now, obviously, one of the big strengths for Texas in general, but also I think for the entire game, is really in the trenches. And Texas is, at least statistically speaking, one of the best defenses in the entire country, particularly within the defensive front too. Now, people will sit there and criticize too, to some extent, that part of the statistical prowess is that they didn't face as many competitive teams. However, when you look at their whole body of work and you just look at how much depth they actually have, I mean, they're pretty explosive in terms of actually getting to the quarterback, being able to tackle really well, and also being a relatively disciplined team too. I mean, Coach Stark has, he's been a bunch of different places. He's been at USC. He's been a college coach for over 20 years now. So he's well experienced in this phenomenon, and he knows what he's doing too. And then Kenny Dillingham, obviously well experienced coaching Bo Nix at Oregon before, finding his way down here and doing his thing. But I sit there and ask myself, what are sort of the keys to victories for Arizona State and Texas? And obviously, let's just throw it out there. Arizona State is clearly a big underdog in this game, given just how dominant Texas has been for the most part this season, and just the fact that their only 2 losses was the regular season matchup back on October 19th and the SEC championship game that went into overtime. So when you put those 2 things together, there's only so many things about Texas that you can really attack if you're Arizona State. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much about Cam Skattebo. I mean, his tape already speaks for itself, so I'm not going to sit here and rant about him the entire time. They're going to have to. I think the one thing that I think might be a little bit underestimated by Arizona State is I think they're going to find a little bit more ways to use them in the passing game. I think you're going to expect a lot of Texas possibly crowding the line and crowding the front, whereas I sit there and say to myself, hey, if you can be a little bit more creative, maybe some pistol packages, some shotguns, really getting out in the flat and be able to break some tackles that way, I think that'd be a really smart, effective way to use them. And I know that would be, for example, for me, on just maybe a couple different ways that you can utilize Cam Skattebo. But in terms of otherwise what they have to do, I mean, obviously I talked about the trenches a little bit ago in terms of just how fundamental that's going to be, is not only for Arizona State's rushing attack, but even Texas too. You sit there and you have Javen Blue and you have Wisner. They've combined for over 1,600 yards rushing. So having that 1-2 punch there, I think, is going to be really difficult for Arizona State to stop too. But also, if you're Texas, another big addition is going to be you have wide receiver Isaiah Bond back, who is really an incredible talent. He's speedy, he's shifty, he's a great route runner, and I think they're going to have a couple issues stopping Isaiah Bond and stopping some of these wide receivers that Texas has too. And when you look at their whole body of work, I mean, Quinn Ewers right now has the longest streak in FBS in terms of consistent touchdown passes in games. He's had at least one touchdown pass for the past 25 straight games. So let's not underestimate Ewers. I'm not giving him a fair amount of criticism in this show. And I know the hot take is going to be, well, Arch Manning should be starting for him. He could just transfer and go elsewhere, but I don't really foresee that happening. Everybody knows that Arch Manning is going to be the next guy up, and especially in this day and age where everybody's transferring, everyone's doing this, that, and the other. It really comes down to being able to develop as a player, and Arch Manning sees the epiphany of, hey, if you truly sit there and develop and you have the right coaches surrounding you, you're going to be in the NFL one day, especially when you're a Manning too. So I think he's doing the right thing by taking the slow burn, and especially in this day and age of college football, and even when you look at college at large, I mean, you only really need one or two good seasons to really solidify yourself as an NFL talent. But outside of the trenches and the rushing attacks for both these programs, which I think is going to be probably the most fundamental part of this entire game, but another aspect is going to be the turnover battle. Arizona State and Texas have both done an incredible job at causing turnovers, and Arizona State also has the 27th ranked rush defense in the country, only giving up about 117 yards per game. So there is a little bit of a credit to give out there too, but it's just that when you're a team like Texas, you just have so much more talent too. And Arizona State has done a really good job this year in terms of the turnover margin. They have 22 takeaways to only 8 turnovers themselves. Definitely ranked in the top 20 in terms of turnover margin within the entire FBS too. And it's going to come down to discipline. It's going to come down to attention to detail. And you just can't afford to be able to have those mistakes, especially when you're a significant underdog too. If you sit there and have a quick fumble, or Sam Levitt gets under pressure, then it could be a long day for these Arizona State Sun Devils. And shifting gears to Texas, you really just have to more or less do what you've been doing, in the sense of they know what their strengths are. Their strengths are, hey, you have that 1-2 punch. You have Quinn Ewers, who, for the most part, has he gotten criticism this year, but he's going to get the job done. Really get these receivers out into space, being able to break tackles and get those yards after catch, which has been one of Texas' biggest strengths this year. They're pretty sound on the defensive side of the ball, although I think you can nitpick a little bit in the secondary. But at the same time, when Arizona State doesn't have Jordan Tyson either, it's definitely a big question mark for them in terms of how they can really attack this Texas team. But I think you got to imagine that Arizona State's going to come out aggressive in this game. They're going to come out swinging. I think Kenny Dillingham is that type of gritty coach who I think knows how to motivate players. He knows how to sell the message to a team. And from all the interviews that I've seen with a lot of the Arizona State players, they're excited for this game and they're ready for the challenge. And I think one of the people can complain all they want about college football playoff and how Arizona State and maybe Boise State shouldn't be ranked the way that they are. But at the end of the day, one of the things that are most compelling about this format is just simply the new fresh matchups that we're getting. Now, granted, obviously Ohio State and Oregon, we're getting that again. But at the same time, too, when you get these fresh matchups like the Boise States and Penn States of the world, like the Georgia and Notre Dames of the world, and now this Texas-Arizona State game, even if it turns out to be a blowout where it ends up being a couple possession loss here and there, it's still a fresh matchup. It's still getting product on the eyes. And at the same time too, it's great just to have these games here. Because if we talk a couple years ago, they would just be playing in this bowl game and that would be the end of it. So look for Arizona State to really be aggressive in terms of running the ball. Look for them to really win over the turnover battle early and also capitalizing in terms of points. And Texas, your biggest thing is making sure you use that 1-2 punch, making sure Quinn Ewers gets hot early, gets some explosive plays, really take advantage of what actually is quite a vulnerable Arizona State secondary, and most importantly, getting after the quarterback. When you have Collins and Anthony Hill, 2 young sophomore linebackers who have combined 15 sacks on the season, if they get home early, this could be a game that gets out out of hand. But I would say for this game, I think Texas is going to be able to take care of business, and